In progress.
Hello and welcome to the Tuesday, September 21st meeting of the Finance Committee pursuant to the Governor's June 16th, 2021 Act relative to extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency, suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, General Laws, Chapter 30A, Paragraph 20. The Finance Committee will be using remote participation for this meeting. The audio of this meeting is being recorded and will be posted to the town's webpage within 24 hours in accordance with keeping the public informed of actions during this meeting. I would ask that all participants remotely attending this meeting, please state your name for identification purposes each time you speak throughout the meeting. This time I will take a roll call of attendance. Mr. Alfred.
Here, and perfect job, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Ziemer.
Here.
Mr. Whitaker.
Here.
Mr. Murphy.
I'm here.
Mr. Robinson.
Here.
Okay, and I am of course here. So we are officially called to order. Under item number 1, the minutes approval, I just want to tell you that I did have an exchange with Lisa about the preparation of the minutes, and she sent me a draft, and I've been giving her some feedback on how to do that. She sent me a couple more drafts this afternoon, so I will look at those and try to get those ready for voting next week and get them out to you sometime later this week. But I will say that, to give credit to Mark, it's some of the similar things. The first set she produced was 7 pages long, and I had to give her the same discussion I had with you about it doesn't have to be a transcript. So, but anyway, so we should have minutes forthcoming. That was the only thing I had under administrative matters, unless anybody had anything else. If not, we'll go on to item number 2, update from Travis. Go ahead, Travis.
Yeah, so I can, I sent a couple emails to the Finance Committee after the Select Board meeting last night, and I can get into that as much as the chair would like. Essentially, the warrant closed yesterday at 4 p.m. We have 19 articles generated, essentially internally, 1 citizen's petition. We plan on having some follow-up conversations that will be on the Select Board's agenda posted for next Monday night, the 27th. I did post that agenda today because the clerk's office is going to be closed for a couple of days of training. And so on that, I tried to be specific about some of the things that we know might be of interest to the Finance Committee or anybody interested in town meeting. Namely, we will bring in Jay Tallerman to discuss the citizen's petition with the Select Board. There's some questions on the legality that I think we should, make sure council is weighing in on. If there's any other articles that we feel like we need Jay's feedback on, we can certainly do that. I'll pull up the list here so we can, I can discuss again, however, at the discretion of the chair, what you'd like to discuss tonight. But, there are 3 articles related to a conversation that we've all had, Finance Committee and Select Board, on a stabilization fund as it relates to cannabis revenue. So I sent to you all essentially the 3 articles that were put forward by Kate Federoff based on the feedback from the discussions of the Finance Committee and the Select Board previously as it relates to that topic. I presented it to the Select Board and you essentially the way that Kate delivered it to me. So based on obviously our feedback. So there's those. Again, I don't know if Jay could always weigh in next week if we need him to, but I think for the most part, he'll be with us on that topic. Additionally, Stantec will be with the Select Board. They had presented previously the Sidewalk prioritization plan. At that time, the Select Board essentially asked them to make sure that they were working internally with the other group of engineers at Stantec that was doing our water modernization study. And that when that Stantec group came back, that, there was some synergy presented in those 2 things. So I would expect that conversation will be wrapped up at this point also. So what we have, Stantec's report on the 27th, the draft report that they previously presented on the sidewalks, and then also a report that we have through the Mass DOT Complete Streets Project list is essentially the basis of 3 articles that I have on here, which we'll wrap up after that conversation next Monday, which is, so let me pull up the whole list, which I pulled up last night, and I believe is covered in the Holliston Reporter. So obviously the first three are here, once all of these will be somewhat dependent upon conversations that we have as it relates to our finance policies, which, we're all kind of in the midst of right now. So I won't reiterate anything. And the capital budget conversation is one that has been ongoing with the capital subcommittee, which is chaired by Vin Murphy. And we've had a couple of conversations. I believe Vin just posted again for this Thursday, I believe, to wrap up with a recommendation to you all, which then would be a recommendation in the finance committee report. This is just a list. I can pull up the actual numbers, although I believe I attached it to the email to you as well. And I believe that
and we'll do that next week, Travis. So we'll go through this list in detail.
I won't go through these
because the subcommittee is going to make the decisions this week. We'll just wait till have the full discussion with the committee next week.
So I just have it set up essentially that we can plug in the numbers. The fund transfer to affect the tax rate is one that we have on here standard. Generally, it's a no action, but I didn't see any reason to remove it at the moment. Especially when we don't know the free cash number. Community Preservation Fund, as of right now, this may just be a report of the CPC. At which point we can update people on the balances and make sure that that's in the record. At this time, the ones that I had been tracking that I thought would be going to the CPC potentially for October, to the Blair Square project, and a couple of generator requests through the Parks Commission. All of those now appear to be on the timeline of May instead of October.
Really? So Travis, I don't mean to interrupt, but CPC's meeting tomorrow, according to the posting, right? So, and it looks like on their Michelle and I were looking at this earlier. On their agenda, they have 3 items. And so maybe it is May, but I looked at that just to see what they were considering, figuring they were going to be reviewing proposals for October. So,
yep. No, and I told Frank, we're going to have this article on here, and if it's going to be a report, that's fine. And if you get me something, he knows the deadline that I need before we go to print. So, it helps when we have the article on there. It gives them that amount of time to post. But at this point, my understanding is that Blair Square is now on a May timeline. That's what I've been told by that group. And so that's the information I'm going off of.
Yeah, that might be fine. I as I said, I don't think I think as a practical matter, the stuff they're talking about wouldn't be till next summer anyway. But I just happened to notice it was on their agenda tomorrow. So go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, and so again, if we're talking about it next week, I'll be dealing with that information at the same time that you all are, obviously, and we'll take that as it comes. The overall balance of the CPC of the CPF, is just north of $3 million. So that gets broken down into different buckets, and within this report, we'll. Within the article, we'll show the balances by bucket. So Sharon's ready to do that. It's really just a question of whether or not they're going to have recommendations for appropriation. All right. I sent to you all today, and I apologize. I just wanted to clean up some of the language on one of them before. Otherwise, I would have sent it last night as I was leaving the select board meeting. But they were comfortable with Articles 7, 8, and 9, which I forwarded to you all. The funding of the legal support for the cable license renewal. We just wrapped up Verizon, which was a 5-year agreement. The Comcast is going to be a 10-year agreement. So the dollar amount that I have on here that you'll see, I believe in the article, in the language that I sent, is $25,000. So if you look back, this was 2 years ago that the town meeting authorized the money for the legal fees for the Verizon one, and that was 15. So it's essentially twice as long. I guess economies of scale. We're doing okay at 25, but that is based on a quote that I have and looking at the billable hours that went into that.
Okay, well, Travis, on that one, I just have one question, which is, was the full 15 expended on the first one?
Yes. In fact, the select board's professional services ended up needing to clean up some of the mess at the end of the fiscal year. Not substantially, but I certainly am using that to project the 25,000, plus, the lead-in period, and the legal bills that accrue over that time, plus the fact that we're talking about a 10-year agreement is going to make it a little bit more complicated. And so I'm a bit of an educated guess, but also going off the numbers that we spent on the Verizon. So I can pull this down at any point if you want, Ken. Just let me know. I mean, I sent individual packets. I guess I could do it too here. So 7 is the one I just talked about. This is the 25,000 I just mentioned. That the language is here for you all to ask any questions. I don't have backup with this. Although I could.
No, that's fine. I had just looked it over in advance when you sent it, and my first thought was, how did we come out on because knowing we had appropriated this for the last contract, I was just curious as to how much we ended up spending on that one.
Can I ask a quick question? Wasn't there something last year about something that was happening on the national level where cable companies didn't have to do something locally? And
they were trying to get out of this, yes.
So did that didn't happen, or is that still in the middle of negotiating?
I would say, there was a potential for seismic changes to this process, and it was more tweaks to the process, which, complicated it. But also at the end of the day, I think we did pretty well with Verizon. Barry Sims is on the Cable Advisory Committee and worked with the attorney, and then I got involved as I came into town. So there was no seismic shift that had been anticipated, but there were some tweaks to the process.
Okay, thank you.
So just looking at the other, so I sent that one to you today. Certainly can answer any questions or bring more information if needed. The fire EMS organizational evaluation. Let me just pull this down because I see a hand that may be on 7.
So Travis, is evaluation the new code name for study?
Yeah, you guys don't like the word study, so we'll evaluate it.
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Robinson.
Yeah, I jumped the gun because he was talking fast. I want to talk about Phipps Tunnel, so I'll keep my hand up, and when you get to Phipps, shout out.
All right, let me pull it back up here. So I'm going to pull up the main list here, and just I'm focusing on 7, 8, and 9 because those are the ones I sent today. I don't see significant changes happening to them other than feedback from you and the select board. So that was the cable contract, the fire EMS organizational evaluation or study. I do have a quote. There's really probably 2 horses in this race when it comes to the firms that do this work. On the municipal level, it's MRI, which is Municipal Resources Incorporated. They do a lot of the placements of fire chiefs and police chiefs, especially as it relates to civil service, and then they benchmark a lot of the public safety units against one another. And the Collins Center, which Holliston's probably more familiar with, also does these types of studies or evaluations, if you will. And so, what I put together, and when I do this, does that change for you all, or do I need to shut it down? And are you seeing now the narrative? Okay, you see the narrative now. All right, so the $28,000 is based on a quote that I had from both of those firms. I had discussions on what an engagement may look like. These firms are aware of Holliston. In fact, when they're doing organizational evaluations for other towns and they're benchmarking against different models, Holliston is a town that they use for the call model. So they're familiar with us. There's not a huge amount of lead time. And what we're going to get is really recommendations on, here is the level of service we're providing. Here's what it costs. Here's all of the factors that go into it when it comes to personnel, right? One of the items is interesting is, these are not quote unquote FTEs when they're on call firefighters or EMS, but, we are, because of the stipend process and the way that our bylaws work, we are offering benefits, right? So that goes into obviously the whole cost model. And that is feedback that, they'd be looking at and giving us in this whole evaluation. The level of service we're providing on EMS compared to other towns, they'd be able to look at other things like regionalization, which I put in here, privatization, staffing models, those types of things. I tried to be as sort of forthcoming on what might go into this evaluation as possible, but at the same point, I have no idea, quite frankly, what type of recommendations would come out of it. I see 3 hands, so I'm going to stop.
Okay. Well, the first question is Jay, are you still waiting for Phipps?
Yes, but you know what? I'm sorry. I was going to put it down and then put it up. I have a question on this one too, Ken.
Okay,
but,
go ahead then.
So maybe this is kind of a rookie question, or two-part question. Who's asking for this study?
Yeah, so the way that it was discussed, we had some residents, we obviously, we have budget hearings between the select board and the finance committee, each have their own. Really in the discussions on the select board's review of the fire budget and the ambulance budget, we had some residents bringing up questions about call times and those types of things, specifically on the ambulance side more than anything, although the call model really is why we would loop these two together. So in that, in the FY22 budget development process, we made a couple tweaks at the recommendation. So the fire chief's budget request will put together some things that say, look, this is a level service request, so it doesn't include, but if we wanted to improve X, Y, or Z, here are things that I would recommend. Included in those were additional hours for inspectional services on the fire side and additional hours for administrative support on the ambulance side. And so what ended up happening between the select board, the finance committee, and then town meeting was incremental changes to both the fire and ambulance budgets to try to affect and then be able to evaluate the impact of those changes to the budget. So it was increasing inspectional hours on the fire side that'll support the fire chief, free his time up elsewhere, and administrative support on the ambulance side. And again, so we'll be able to look at the impact of those before we get into the 23 budget and determine, the impact if it had the desired outcome. And then,
but this is a study. Like the short of it is, this is a study.
So in the 22 budget, we had those incremental changes. The other thing that we discussed was bringing back and looking at the entire operation. Right, those are small tweaks that we think are going to improve our service level. This is a more holistic approach to looking at it and deciding if we're using the right model. And that came out of that conversation. It would be run through my office. I would procure this and lead the engagement, only to have it as a third party looking in at the fire department rather than have the fire chief lead the engagement.
Okay, so the select board's looking for this. That's what I was like, who's asking for this? I think
that's why it says sponsored by right there.
Okay.
If I could just go, though, Jay, this is like last year's adjustment was the second adjustment in I think about 5 years that we did too. There were tweaks to the model and costs and stuff. So I'm just saying it's been a recurring sort of
right.
Okay, let me ask a question just to save time. Like, is there anybody else on the board that like is questioning this, or is everyone fine with it?
I don't think, I mean, we will debate it certainly next week, but I don't think there's a big issue. The fundamental, the other thing that hasn't been pointed out yet is there was a change in the way that they controlled the service. In other words, this was the thing about ALS versus BLS versus paramedic, those types of things. We're certified at a level that is now kind of in no man's land because of the way they changed things. That's the real underlying issue. Is we were at it's kind of like having small, medium, large, and we were medium, and then they said, okay, we're getting rid of medium, so you're small or large. And now medium has no place in this new structure. So that's one of the other reasons we need to figure out, because we're going to have to spend money. Okay. If we want to be large, we're going to have to spend money to get large. And if we don't want to spend that money or we go to small, then you have to ask the question of, do we even need the ambulance? You know what I mean? Then you get into that question of, do you even need it?
I'm good. I don't want to take more time. That was very helpful, Ken. I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, Dan, you were next.
Yeah, I mean, so look, I've sort of been rarely is there a study that I push for, but this is one that I think is necessary. But my question is, this is written like it's an ambulance-only study, but the title has fire in it. So is the scope the entire department, or is it just really the ambulance?
No, we would look at the fire side as well. I can certainly adjust the comments, but no, the scope of the engagement would entail both. I think the description that Dr. Shada just gave probably highlights why that was the focus of the comments, but that can certainly be adjusted to make sure that everybody understands it's both.
Would it be significantly cheaper to just do the ambulance?
I don't know.
Just the only reason for my question is that, I mean, obviously it's not for me to decide which is the more pertinent one or the one that has the bigger current issues. But if there is one that had more, we as we've gone through, right, we probably don't have money to do an overhaul of both sides, certainly, right? And maybe even the ambulance might be challenging. I just don't want to spend money on something that we know that we're not going to be able to afford, especially if we don't think that we're going to be doing any changes. I mean, 28,000 is not a ton, but to begin with. But I'm just, if it's 50-50, then
I think the way that we operate to separate them would probably overcomplicate the issue. And I mean, I can certainly check on the savings. I don't think it would be substantial. The other thing I should mention here, and I should actually mention in the comments as well, is that we have engaged with 5 communities in our area, 3 that border us, with an EMS-funded study of dispatch. And what that is going to do, and that will be done by the Collins Center, is specifically look at dispatch, police, and fire and EMS for these 6 communities. Look at anywhere that they feel like regionalization might be an option, and if not, sort of give each community how it looks in this group and how it looks and what their recommendations would be for each community separately. And so that is one item here that, certainly would connect fire and EMS, that won't necessarily be the focus of this engagement, because we will be doing that as paid for by E911. But I can certainly, I can ask the question of what it would look like for just an EMS engagement, but I don't think it would be substantially different.
Yeah, I mean, if it's just a couple of thousand, that's not a big deal. But it's, if it's half, I just don't want to, again, we don't want to pay for a report that's just going to sit on a shelf, because we know we're not going to be able to shell out $1 million or whatever it would take to go full time on the fire department or whatever, right?
Okay, Ms. Zimmer, you were next.
Well, you partially answered that, Travis, because you had mentioned regionalization, and I was going to ask if they're going to be looking at other towns, or if they're just going to look at Holliston and then say you should look at regionalization, or if they're actually going to be looking at other towns while they're looking at us.
Right. So for the dispatch study that we're in, obviously that part of the focus of that is, more and more towns are looking at it because it's becoming more and more difficult to staff their dispatch centers. And so that's the focus of the E911 study. And that is being done by the Collins Center at the expense of E911. For this study, yes, I mean, they'll be benchmarking us against other communities, and then also looking at models that include regionalization as a potential model against our status quo, which does not include regionalization.
Okay, and then I just wanted to tell Jay something. Jay, when I started on the FinCom, the revolving fund for ambulance covered purchasing an ambulance. So that's obviously something has shifted along the past 9-10 years. And so that's one of the reasons. I know we haven't really discussed it. This is the first time, but that's one of the reasons I think that it's time for a study like this to find out exactly what the reason is for that shift, that we can no longer do that. So that's it. Thank you.
Okay, Mark.
Thank you. So, Travis, you said that the E911 study would incorporate the police, and it's, the reason why I'm asking that question is I'd be curious to know why. If we're talking true life safety, that to me that incorporates the police as well. But if it's covered elsewhere, then that's that. No need to worry about it. But
yeah, so the E911 study is specific to dispatch, so they're looking at police, fire, EMS, and for each of the 6 towns in that area, and everybody does it differently, quite honestly, in all 6 of the communities. So it's going to be fascinating. And then, right, we are not looking at our model of police. I think, we're in a relatively standardized model of how police is put out there, and the police chief continues to bring up staffing levels, and we'll look at that on a budget basis, but I don't think we need to look at the operations on the same level that we're talking about with fire and EMS.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, anything else on that?
Yes.
Oh,
I have a question. See my hand?
there you go. Yes, I see your hand.
The 911, what communities are they including? Do you know,
I can
Travis?
do this off the top of my head. Millis, Medfield, Medway, Sherburne, Dover, Holliston.
Okay, Gold Star. No. Just curious.
Yeah. And so we've done the kickoff meeting with the chiefs of all those towns to be involved. Everybody has different, priorities. Some people are having trouble staffing their dispatch. Some people are just, making sure that they're doing it the right way, covering their bases to make sure that, they're providing the service level at the right cost. Some people are looking to increase service level. They're having issues. And I think that, it's just time for us to be part of that conversation.
Isn't it something related to the cell phones too? That's part of the argument for the one they did down in Foxborough, was because to get away from the state police fully, to kind of regionalize the whole thing.
Yeah, and there's been efforts right there on the North Shore where I was previously. There was a rec that did not do well. The Foxborough one has been, I think they just got some big communities to join after not joining originally. Those, any of those regional issues, come with a lot of things that we need to consider.
Yep.
Rewriting governance structure so that we have a seat at the table. None of those are slam dunks, and they're all going to be long processes that we'll discuss. But that one is not covered under this engagement.
Sounds like governance committee work. I'm just kidding. Yeah, you said governance. Huh? Okay, continue, Travis.
All right, let me come back here. So we just did fire, EMS. All right, so the three that I was going through here are the cable, fire, EMS, and then the FIPS, which I know Jay had mentioned. So this came to us. I've sat down a few times since I've been in town on the rail trail. We've had some discussions, and your liaisons, which are Dan and Vin, on two topics, which relates to potentially changes in the FY23 as it is how we manage grounds, which could eventually incorporate the rail trail. Currently, pretty much all maintenance of the rail trail is being done by volunteers, which is phenomenal. I would say that this is probably one of the first projects that we've kind of come on in a while where it's, this is clearly outside of the scope of what our volunteer group can do. And they've made that clear to me and requested to sit down, and we've gone through these. So the Phipps tunnel is really the priority in their minds. And they make a strong case. They have some engineering background in their volunteer ranks. So what they're looking for here, and the quote is attached behind it if anybody has questions on the scope, is a geotechnical review. And they did put in an ARPA request for a full amount at this point. They've kind of been told that potentially, but at the moment it's parked. And this is really to kick it off. So it would be a phase one. This certainly would potentially be before other costs. If what we determine is that there needs to be substantial work done to the Phipps tunnel, most likely that would be a project that would be brought at least in front of the CPC for review for potential funding. But at the moment, they're looking to evaluate with a very specific geotechnical investigation with a quote attached.
Okay, Mr. Robinson.
Yeah, so I actually saw Robert Wideneck at Celebrate Holliston, and the study makes sense, but there's a lot of other considerations floating around whatever would come out of that study. So I would be curious. I think the study makes sense. We have to figure out like the drainage issue, which is, to oversimplify it. But to fix the drainage issue, there's a couple other things that need to be considered. And one of them, I thought, if I understood correctly, was when it relates to the tunnel, Highland Street also. So like I'm thinking about some of the select board meetings that I've sat on where we're looking at something very surgical, but in order to like holistically solve that issue and solve it the right way, like, is this a start, or are we going to do this one to figure out the drainage issue on the tunnel and then have additional studies to address some of the other issues that are related, that would need to be addressed in order to address the drainage issue on the Phipps tunnel?
Yeah, so I think some of the drainage issues, right, if you're talking about coming down from Highlands, right, part of this whole thing is, right, one of the things is that we're going to need to address some of the items. Some of them, we need to determine if they're cosmetic and can be fixed, right? And that's certainly a different scale and scope of a future engagement. And some of them are structural, and some of them are items that, we don't want to fix until we address the drainage issue, and we need to determine, the basis of that and how to address it. This is certainly, as I mentioned, as I try to put with phase one and the geotechnical, and then in the description, this is not the solve all. This is the beginning of a conversation. We need to take this information before we would bring a full engagement, most likely through the CPC.
So this would be step one, and probably there would be additional analysis before we'd start talking about spending real dollars on the project, shovel-ready projects. Is that right?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
So there
All right,
was
I'm
a
good.
request from that same group to the ARPA steering group, and it sort of looked at approaching Phipps Tunnel from both sides, right, and work associated with addressing both. I think within that, there were some clear questions in the description of, we believe that this is what we should do. We believe that this is what we should do on this side, but we do need some more information. This is essentially gathering that information.
Okay, I'm good. It's bigger than a breadbasket is the bottom line, but it's a good start.
Okay. Ben?
Yeah, just to allow to add a little bit about this is that people should keep in mind that, yes, it's studying to take a look at the tunnel and look at the what potential projects need to be done with respect to drainage, with respect to the integrity of the tunnel itself and things like that. But I think it also is important to remember that CPC isn't going to fund a possible project. They need to have something a little more solid. So this would give the CPC something to look at. I know they've applied for a grant a couple times, and I don't think I think they had not been accepted for those grants, but it's, time's a ticking. It's not, it's still functional. It's still okay, but how much longer? And it's an important asset in the town. So we want to move ahead.
Well, Ben, I'd actually ask one question. Maybe, I don't know if you or Travis would know this, right? How close is it? In other words, it's not like you go there and you see big chunks of the tunnel missing and you're saying, okay, this thing could come down in a year, right?
That's why we need to do this.
No, I'm not arguing against this. I'm just saying that I don't want the public to think there's some imminent danger.
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying we want to make sure that, that it's an important asset for years to come.
Okay.
I guess what I'm wondering is the scope big enough? Because there's considerations of how the water gets to the trail. And I'm just trying to choose my words carefully. That's one thing that needs to be addressed. And then when you go further into the structure itself, how you address that structure.
Well,
so is 9,500 it feels small, but is it going to get us, could we get economies of scale by increasing the scope, or is everyone good with the scope?
What I would say is let's wait until let's get the Trails Committee in here to talk about this, right? Or
Okay. Everyone on my team here, you understand where my head is at, and I think
I'm just saying for questions like that, unless Travis is pre-briefed and able to defend, and most of the time we just have the affected, the group that really wants it come in and answer all the questions. So we'll do that.
I'll stand down. I'm good. Thank you.
Okay.
Right. And so I'd be trying to speak for Robert. And, I do believe, based on speaking with that group, that this is the right call to move forward with this. I think we need to gather information and have a plan for Phipps Tunnel. It's something that, clearly is going to be contracted out and not be done by volunteer service. And we just need to know so we can plan accordingly. But I'm sure Robert will be happy to answer.
I was gonna say,
If he's good, I'm good. I worked on the last project I worked on with him, enough said. So any other questions, if anyone else feels they need to bring them in, I support that. Otherwise, I'll just follow up with him directly.
Yeah, the just as a general procedural thing, Jay, for things like this, what we do when we generally do these reviews is we identify the follow-up. So in other words, we don't try to answer all the questions again, because Travis may not, on some articles, yes, he's representing the article, but on others like this, when we come across something like this, if people have questions, then we just say a simple thing. Okay, do we need to have them come in? Yes, we do. And then we save all our questions for when we get, so I'll get Robert in here next week if I can, and then we can ask him any questions we need to ask him.
What I'm saying is based on what I heard, Ken, I would not have an issue with him not coming in, but if you think that he should come in, I support that decision also.
Okay, great, thanks. Okay, go ahead, Travis.
All right, I'm going to pull back up the main sheet here because those are the ones that I sent you for 9 Green Street. This is one that essentially I'm still continuing to work on state funding for. The way that I'm situated right now, like I'd like to move ahead for a number of reasons that I can kind of go into high level here. We are moving ahead with the demolition of that building. It is, it is a problem, the building, when it comes to sort of debris, when it comes to kids breaking into it. It's time for that to come down, cap it, make it a safe area. The outcome that PAR put together is a sketch of what that could be in terms of supporting, in sort of figuring out a stormwater system in that area that works, having some green space, having some parking, and then potentially pursuing EV grant opportunities, which we set up, the groundwork for with our revolving fund previously for this site and others. Is essentially ready to go. And what I'd like to do, even though I'm going to continue and hopefully not use local tax dollars to do the project, I'd prefer to have the state pay for it. I would like to see the town meeting review essentially what's been presented to the select board, what was brought out of what was previously the 9 Green Street Committee and their recommendation, and have that reviewed by the town meeting.
Is there any money associated with that, Travis?
I'm sorry?
Is there going to be any money associated with that?
Yeah,
approved. Okay.
Yeah, so the thought process would be similar to the one that we did on the CPC previously as it relates to the project behind Casey's, which would be to appropriate the money with the understanding that at XY date, we will review if we receive the funding from the grant opportunity, we would look to then turn back that money to its funding source. So that'll be the approach on this. And again, I'm ready to, what would be put into the warrant would be essentially everything that we have from PAR, which is, the work that they've done so far. So they were originally engaged after our December 2020 town meeting to design and engineer a demo plan, stormwater plan, and site plan for 9 Green Street. Then we came back in May, we got the money for the demolition. They are currently reviewing that, and that building will be demoed relatively soon. Will not be ready to pursue a parking lot immediately, right? Most likely there will be some delay, but at the same point, we'd like to move as quickly as possible in terms of turning that into a useful site. Doesn't have to be fenced off and can be a benefit to the businesses in that area. And then our own assets, which are Goodwill Park and the library, which even though that parking is not right next to it, it's still going to be some of the more convenient parking for that library. I know that that's a sore subject for people here, so I won't hammer that too hard, but at the end of the day, what the 9 Green Street Committee had looked at and what PAR has put forward for people to now review is how that site can work downtown. And so I can probably get that hopefully language to you, certainly by the time for next week for you all to review, and then I would be the one who'd be answering any questions at that time.
Okay, yeah, that's when we're going to want to talk about when we see it next week, I'm sure.
So then the next 3, water, sidewalk, crosswalk, are all related to Stantec in some way. The water system improvements one, just based on conversations and my pushing to have that report done for review is, just as ADA compliance on the Stantec sidewalk report was clearly, the top priority that they identified from our existing network. Similarly, on the water system improvements, they will cover sort of all the questions that were part of the engagement. But clearly one of the things that they're identifying in our water system is going to be our dead ends, right? The lack of looping in some areas leads to stale water, leads to water quality issues. And so we want to be prepared next week. And if at the end of the day, what Stantec presents, the select board is not interested in pursuing in October, we would then have to remove the warrant article. But I think at this point, I want to be ready based on what I believe will be, some recommendations to over a phased-in period of addressing some of these concerns. And then, so let me just, I see hands, but so 11, 12, and 13 all sort of are waiting to be finalized until after that Stantec conversation. The crosswalk safety improvements is obviously related to the sidewalk improvements, but it's specific to also some items that were identified in both the Stantec report, but also the Complete Streets report, the Tier 2 report. We have an application in. We can ask for up to $400,000 every 2 years through the Complete Streets process. And these are crosswalk safety improvements that would be identified through both of those. So we want to make sure Stantec gets to weigh in. We asked the Stantec team that looked at the sidewalks to make sure that they were looking and considering everything included the recommendations that would come out of the water project. So again, looking to wrap all of that up next Monday night with these three.
Okay, Mr. Murphy?
Yeah, what are we looking at dollar-wise, are you thinking right now? Or are you, at this point, do you have an idea of, let's say, the sidewalk improvements? Are we going to do the whole 600 and change, thousand and change? Or are we thinking this is just going to be a lot less than 600,000 at this point?
So, I mean, there's a couple of things. One, I think the point that was made and the conversation that was had was, does it make sense to be going after a borrowing on a number of projects all at once? And my point was, certainly we can have that conversation, but that's a May conversation. It's not an October conversation. We're not ready to go ahead with a request on borrowing at this time. So what we'd be looking at on this warrant would be specific to the projects I've identified. And at that point, right, the 650 number that you're referencing, just in case anybody's unaware, is, the way that the Stantec report identified what the town should be investing in its current sidewalk infrastructure to maintain it over time is $650,000 per year. Certainly, that number is not outrageous, but I don't have the specific project that I want to present to you or projects and the dollar amount at the moment. So I won't quote a number to you right now.
Okay.
Okay, Mr. Murphy, Mr. Alfred, you're next.
So yeah, I'm still a little bit concerned about the fact that we're just getting this stuff in and we're trying to sort of race to get it right onto the warrant. That we're less than a month away from town meeting. We don't have, beginnings of numbers. So for the water system improvements, I mean, we're obviously going to be using the water infrastructure fee, correct? But is this have we looked at whether this is like what the next, I don't know how much money it is, but is this going to preclude us from doing a mile of water pipe next year elsewhere? Like, is that the best decision to make rather than replacing another mile of pipe? As far as the ADA compliance stuff on the sidewalks, I mean, it depends on what it is. And I can't imagine us spending $600,000 right now on sidewalks, given the limited runway. And then the crosswalk safety, I mean, we've been doing a lot of crosswalk safety stuff. We've been putting in a lot of lights and a lot of signs and stuff. And I asked, I continue to ask for, kind of a real, sort of plan, and Tina sent me a whole list of projects, but no real sort of cadence of what the spend and the sort of the goal and the desire for like the sort of the program of what they want to do is. And so I maybe that I'm misreading the crosswalk safety thing a bit, and you can explain that to me, but it just sort of seems like we continue to kind of, I know we've got all these studies and everyone wants to prove that the studies are worthwhile doing, and we're not just doing studies just for study's sake. But just because you've done the study also doesn't mean you should just go right out and start spending right away without actually sort of a plan to implement. As we raised quite clearly with red flags before authorizing all those two studies and the DPW study, we don't have money to do all of them all at once, and the fact that borrowing is now being discussed as ways of doing this when we have a high school SOI over our heads. We still haven't exactly figured out how to fund the potential DPW facility. No one even talks about the fact that there's some in town that think that we need to do something with the library. I mean, it seems like things are being done sort of piecemeal, and that sort of priorities and sort of decisions at that level aren't being made and brought to us with any kind of real plan. And I'll get off my soapbox now.
Okay, well, I know Mr. Robinson's next, but I know that Mr. Sparrow wants to respond to that comment. So I'll let Ben go first. Go ahead, Ben.
Yeah. So, I mean, look, some of this is placeholders, so we don't have the information from Stantec yet. We're waiting for that for next week. Second of all, we're, part of this exercise is to remember, as we come in from the finance committee, we're told we don't want studies that sit on a shelf. We don't, I don't want them either. I'm not saying we do. We're trying to be proactive. We're trying to look at things and get ahead of it. One of the things that we saw from the sidewalk study that we got was 94% of our crosswalks and ramps were not compliant with ADA. And that's a big problem. That's a lot of crosswalks. That's a lot of issues that we have in our town because we haven't been making the investment previously. And I think it's, I can't speak to exactly what these are going to be and what we're going to put forward because I don't have the stuff in front of me. We'll have something, we'll have things. Mostly going to be low hanging fruit. We're not looking to, to do, we're not looking to do Norfolk Street, Vin. I'm looking at you, Vin. Right away, if that's the next project that's coming, we're looking to try to see what are the easy things we can pick off. That's why, like with water infrastructure, it'd be things like dead ends that maybe we can address, that we can try to improve, because some of those there's issues there and things like that. I'm not an engineer, so I can't speak to it, but I know I've been talking to Sean. Those have been issues that we want to look at. So this exercise at this point, I get your point. I want a plan too. We're gonna get to a plan, but the fact is that we're trying to move ahead, because if we don't do something, we wait another 7 months before we can do anything. And I want to make sure that, like, if we can address a few of the crosswalks that are issues, let's do that. Let's fix some of those things. Let's try to address some of those things, and let's see about, like, maybe there's some easy sidewalks that we can address, in downtown, Central Street or whatever. I don't know. I don't know what's going to be there. I don't know quite what's happening. A plan is in the works. We're going to work on it, but we want to make sure that we're forging ahead as much as possible. We're not talking about, this isn't new projects. This isn't like putting something in the ground that's.
No, it's not. It is all new projects, though, really. I mean, my point is, you said, no one wants these things to sit around on the shelf, and absolutely no one wants these things to sit on the shelf. But also, take a little time to digest what you've been given, sit back, think about it, and look, if there's a couple, ramps downtown that, for 25 grand we can fix, and those are the high traffic areas, and we can make sure that we're up to speed there, up to code on ADA. I don't think that there's a problem there. But just because you see a couple sidewalks on Central that you can sort of fix easily, those may not, if you actually take a couple months and think about it and have some conversations and talk to different people, those may not be the sidewalks that you think that end up being the highest priority. So my point is, there's putting it on the shelf and not doing anything with it, and then there's like getting it and immediately trying to like throw something on the warrant just because you want to just throw something on the warrant because you don't want to wait 7 months. And that, we're basically getting these reports and getting the final information after the warrant's been closed. And I know that these things have been put on there as placeholders. Everything's being done legitimately. I'm not saying that it's anything. I'm not, but just trying to sort of like scramble to get something because you want to show that something's being done is also not, I think, the best way to do it either.
Okay, so point, counterpoint, let's move on. The other thing I would say, though, just to be clear, is the sitting on the shelf comment was more related to having to do the studies again than anything else, right? Because the issue was when we said there's going to take a lot of money to do all this, it may take years. The comment that was made about that was, if it goes on the shelf, we don't want to hear, 5 years later that, okay, we got to pay to do it again because it's been sitting on the shelf for 5 years.
But taking 6 months to think about things.
No, I'm not. This has nothing to do with what your point. I was just saying that the issue wasn't we have to get a study and we have to go act on it right away. It was that the stuff we get from the study may take years to implement, and we don't want to have to go back and do the study again. If we did, then we wasted money doing the study the first time. Anyway, Travis, you had something to inject on this before we get to Jay?
There's just two things. One, the original question on, the water project and does moving ahead with the water project in terms of looping potentially on the October warrant, that mean we can't do a mile next year? I mean, obviously we'll be looking at all the financials on that. We have the water retained earnings as well as the water infrastructure fee account. One of them is essentially intended to do a mile a year. And the select board has indicated they like to look at that on an annual basis. And then the water retained earnings is the one that, all water systems have in each town, and is really, it's really the free cash, right? It's really the unassigned fund balance of that. It can be used for projects, but it also, it needs to be at a certain level to allow for rate stabilization and those types of things. So all of that would go into that conversation.
My point was just, it may be that whatever this work that is actually what the select board, what Sean, what you want to be done first, right? But does anyone ask the question? That's more of my point. Like, But,
Yeah, I mean, that's
yeah.
again, right. One of the things was the Stantec sidewalk report was given to the select board, and they essentially asked, look, we understand what you're saying on the ADA compliance. Here's what we'd like to do in terms of knowing in the next 5 years what your recommendation are. Please come back with that before the report is finalized. And also, when we're going to hear from the other Stantec team that is looking at water specifically, make sure that when that group comes in, they're able to answer a couple of the questions that were asked previously. That is why the 27th is important to wrap up some of those things. In terms of rushing it, I disagree with that characterization. At the end of the day, we looked at the timing of the engagement of this, right? We specifically put in target dates in the RFP with the idea that this information would be in. Would it be better if it had been a month ago? Absolutely. But I also don't want to rush the results of the engineers who are giving us this work that is going to last us for a long time. And again, to what Ben said, right? If there's low-hanging fruit that there's no reason to wait on, I just, again, disagree with that characterization. What it is saying there is zero value in waiting on these things that we all agree need to be done. On larger things, especially anything that needs to be borrowed, again, what the conversation had previously been, that is a conversation that we will begin to prep for May. And if there's things that these reports and the engineers that we paid to look at these two systems have recommendations on that make sense right now, then let's move ahead with them. So that's all I want to say.
Okay, so we've gotten that one done. Okay, Mr. Robinson.
Wow. Okay. I have an additional question. So, Dan, when you were saying we authorized the study, I'm just trying to keep up. When you say we authorized the study, what does that mean?
Well,
Town meeting approved it.
Town meeting approved it.
Okay, the town authorized it. Okay, I got you. Okay.
Eventually, the finance committee recommended, and the town authorized.
Okay, the we is the town. I got it. So the other thing was like trying to paraphrase like a lot of hours of conversation. It's my impression, at least from sitting in the select board meetings, that John Cronin was saying like, hey, let's have a holistic plan that will integrate water and sidewalks. And it went like, to me, the conversation like was healthy debate. And I think where it landed, I didn't hear it characterized that way, or I missed it, that it was quote unquote low hanging fruit, that there is some potential low hanging fruit, but I didn't get a warm and fuzzy, at least one person's opinion that the select board as a whole was like, yeah, like let's go at it because there's low hanging fruit and let's spend the money. There was a lot of debate going on between John Cronin and Tina Hine on the approach. And I don't think it was like violent agreement, or at least it was not my impression. There was violent agreement on the low hanging fruit, but let's assume that there is low hanging fruit. And the town says, yeah, like we approve spending some money on low hanging fruit. Who determines which fruit is going to be worked on? Like, what's going to be that process? Because like Dan's saying, it's coming in hot, right? Like it's coming in quickly. We're not having a lot of time to look at it for the finance committee to say, as advocates for the town, yes, we support this approach. So if we're going to come in hot and say, yeah, okay, well, we're going to go ahead because there's low hanging fruit, how does the money how does that get prioritized? Like what projects are done? Because we're almost taking a risk-based approach to vote on it because we're not having any time to really look at it. And I guess we're going to be asked to state a position on this warrant. Like, is that a fair statement, Ken? That
yes.
Okay.
Yes, and then to be fair, the select board, they'll have to be more specific. You know, and Travis hasn't given us the details yet, so I don't know.
So if the details are following, then let's kill my question. But that's all. Like, and it doesn't need to be an exotic study. It's just more like even bullet format. Like, what are you thinking? And then the last thing is, has there been a pre-read already, or is that we haven't received the study yet, right? No one from the town has received it.
So just to answer your question too, and look, that's a fair characterization, and I don't mean to shut down Dan's question. I agree. I'd prefer to have been having this conversation for the last month so that we've all are bored about talking about the actual report. But at the end of the day, the report is coming out this week. I'll get it to you. They'll review it with the actual engineers on Monday night, be able to ask any questions. If they're not comfortable, yeah, they'll be directing me to remove this from the warrant. And if that's the right call, that's the right call. I just to block it out because of the timing when, you know, we wanted to put ourselves in position to not be losing continuous space. Everybody, including the finance committee, the select board, town. I haven't heard anybody who says like, you know, we don't understand that we need to be investing in our infrastructure. I get it. I'm not trying to push anything that's not ready.
Yeah.
And so, yes, it is a little bit unfair that next week I'll come to you with the article and be asking to essentially vote your opinion on it.
That's fine. Life's not fair. I get it. So is this going to have to go out to bid too? Like think about if we don't vote on this, we basically start the bid process, you know, July, right?
Yeah, pretty much everything. I would say.
So we'd be talking about a year, right? Before
except you have to consider that nothing's really going to happen over the winter anyway.
Well, you could go out to bid. You could go out to bid so that in the spring,
Correct.
That's what we ended up doing with the bridge, and it worked out to hit a very aggressive timeline. So really what you'd be saying is May really means with the bid process, I think it was like August or September. So we'd be talking a while before we'd be able to get shovels in the ground.
Okay, well, I just want to call on Ben while he's not in his chair.
All these projects, when it comes to water, infrastructure, when it comes to sidewalks, when it comes to, I mean, there are some things we can do in terms of crosswalks, in terms of like curb cuts and those types of things. But for the most part, all of these infrastructure projects, you have to think about us bidding them out.
And if they're small projects, maybe we could like use it. We could get lucky and there's filler work because, you know, people are looking at their pipeline. I don't know, but okay, I'm good. Thank you, Ken.
We could also thank the governance committee for costing us a week. And you know,
okay,
I don't think that's productive. I'm good. My question.
Oh, come on.
Okay, go ahead, Ben.
I just really quickly wanted to just address what Jay said about the agreement. I think the select board is in agreement about things. There might be a little bit about degree. What Tina's point was she was talking about tying the water infrastructure to the sidewalk improvements, and she wanted to separate them. And I don't think anyone disputes that that's a possibility. I think before we see what's actually being put in front of us for these studies, like what the low-hanging fruit is, I think it'd be difficult to characterize. The point I made was just I want to make sure that we don't dig up something that we're going to have to dig up in a year because we a sidewalk and then we're going to have to do it again because of the water. That was my only point.
That was the comment that resonated with me the most. Yeah. Like, so, I don't want to be analysis paralysis. I don't want to just spend money like drunken sailors, but like your comment in that meeting was the biggest thing that gave me a little bit of concern.
The select board is in agreement. We do want to invest in infrastructure. It is very important to us.
And I'll just point out for the record that Jay's opinion on drunken sailors is not the opinion of the finance committee before the Drunken Sailors Club calls us up and starts complaining.
I am not condemning or condoning drunken sailors. You know.
I'm just kidding. Ken. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah. So just because I don't want to continue to beat this dead horse, my thing is not that you're going to come to us and ask us for a couple $100,000 for hopefully not more at most. For this, it's that it, and by rushed I simply mean not that we're not spending time on it, but just that it doesn't even feel like it hasn't even landed on our plate yet. And again, we're and let alone the select board's plate to really contemplate and sit back and look at everything and really kind of come up with a plan for what to do. And so it just sort of, oh, sure, let's just ask for this because, we've got a meeting coming up and we can do that.
Okay, point taken.
Yeah.
All right. I disagree with that characterization again. Should I move on or we
should move on.
One question, Travis, whatever you present, are you going to present in a concise, consumable format for us? Because as one member, that would be my expectation and appreciated.
If you look at what he gave us.
I'm wordy.
If you look at what he gave us, for example, on some of the stuff he sent out already, or some of the articles, you'll see what he generally does, right? There's the article itself, and then he tacks on the supporting materials, and then he's here for answering questions.
It might be a rhetorical question, but thank you, Travis.
His presentations are quite good. Whether I agree with them or not, that's a different story, but they're quite good.
Right.
Aligned.
I was told that when I started talking last night, the audience for the select board meeting dwindled rapidly, but
that was only because all the Highland Street people left, or
That's true. Speaking of which, that one's coming up. The stormwater management. This is one that you've all heard about a million times. So this one I can send to you. I had a conversation with the contractor. You know, you all know this is not being driven by our desire to do these things. This is very much DEP's thumb on us. This is year 4 of the MS4, which is the municipal separate stormwater sewer system. That's why it's MS4. It is a permit that as we get into year 5, you know, we've all been preparing for this as cities and towns. There is going to be a lot more, you know, you've identified through the last 5 years of doing these studies and annual reports, deficiencies in your system, and now we're going to make you do those projects. For a town like Holliston, the biggest thing is probably going to be culverts and outfalls. Those are the things that we have been through the MS4 process, highlighting and inventorying, the verb of inventory. And, you know, that's where we are at the moment. So year 4 for us, the biggest change from what you've seen in the past is really going to be the phosphorus control plan. That is related to the fact that we are in the Charles River watershed, and phosphorus is an issue that the Charles River needs to deal with. That's what DEP's concern is. We're in that watershed, therefore phosphorus control plan is part of our year 4 MS4. Otherwise, it's very similar things. We're continuing with the field work that's being done. A lot of this information is now in our GIS system, which has been, you know, again, something that this town has needed to work on, is making sure everybody's, you know, information is all getting captured in GIS between the building inspector, the assessor, DPW. The quote for sort of like all in is $90,000. I had a conversation with them of where that can go that gets us in compliance, but, you know, is not the bells and whistles. And it's somewhere between 70 and 90, right? So, last year, the article was 92,300, I believe. So, I mean, this is kind of our commitment. You know, I think we discussed last year, and I think we can discuss any year, building this in to the budget. But at the end of the day, what it really is right now in year 1 through 5 is staying in compliance with reporting, collecting a lot of information, and getting prepared. Because after that, it's going to be projects. And so I don't know that the budget approach is right. I think the way the town has done it with free cash for articles every October is probably the right approach.
Ben?
Yeah, quick question regarding stormwater management. With the different roadways we're doing, have we taken into consideration and tried to be proactive and fix things we know would be out of compliance? Or are we just waiting until we get told to fix them? I'm looking through, thinking down Mudville, since a lot of road work is still being done there.
Yeah, I mean, that project, you know, quite frankly, there were problems in that area that we could have addressed, you know, 2 years ago that didn't get addressed because we knew it was going to be part of a larger project, right? That happens all the time in various instances. You know, we had a culvert collapse right at the Sherburne line that we had to replace because of a collapse. And then recently I've been detoured out of Sherburne because they had one as well, right? Those are the ones that are, you know, unfortunately the squeaky wheel gets our attention for the most part when it comes to culverts, even though there are ones that are on our priority list that we've identified in the capital plan and those types of things that we'd like to get to. Are we going around and being as proactive as possible, or waiting until we're going to be forced to in year 5? No, I don't think we're waiting. I think we're going as sort of, you know, methodically as we would be probably on the water side. Should we be more aggressive? I mean, it's a question of financing.
Speaking of aggressive, do you think the state or whomever is at the feds, are they going to say you have to get this done in 5 years, or are they going to be, well, you get it done, period, and give us a long time to do it?
I would see probably a project or two for each municipality being identified with a time frame of, you know, 2 years essentially to do. And then they're going to see sort of what kind of compliance they're getting out of cities and towns.
Okay.
I'm not seeing a huge carrot. I'm seeing more stick when it comes to the
sure. Yeah.
And by the way, I'll just pose a philosophical question, and then I'll move on to Michelle, which is, if a culvert collapses, is it still a culvert? So, okay, Michelle, you're up.
I was just wondering where the dams come on this. Is that part of stormwater management that we discussed last week?
No, so the dams, I think what I discussed in the question that came up at the select board, I believe at the moment what I have available through previous warrant articles is going to allow us to move now. We're back in compliance with the state and the reporting that we got from Leonard. They provided the EAPs on that. We put together a working group, includes Chris Badjack from the Concom and sustainability coordinator. And we are going to engage on a cost benefit analysis on the 3 dams and the 3 possibilities for each of those dams, and then bring that back to the community. I don't need anything on this warrant for that. We're going to try to move ahead with that engagement to have a conversation before May.
Okay, so there's no like interface between those 2 things, stormwater and dams.
I mean, there's certainly the water.
Where ends up in a dam.
Yeah, I mean, the connection when it comes to the MS4, their approach is less dam related. That's really kind of under another umbrella of the state.
Thank you.
Okay, good, Travis. Anything else you want to say about these 16?
Okay. No, and so then the last ones again are all 16 through 19 are marijuana. The zoning delivery question is sort of based on the planning board is taking the recommendation of council. The CCC put together some information on what delivery is as opposed to recreational retail, which the town has determined that it would like to prohibit. We allow cannabis cultivation and manufacturing, and we cannot legally prohibit medical retail. And so there has been some information from the CCC on delivery. The planning board is essentially going to have a public hearing on how to deal with delivery in our zoning bylaws. And so they have that scheduled. The last 3, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, so that sounds, so is that something you put on right now as a placeholder to see what they say? Because if you just said the state's figuring it out, then why would we have something right now on our warrant for it?
No, so essentially, the position of the town has been that we prohibited recreational retail. Why would delivery be different than that, right? We're covered, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's essentially what we're saying. And what the CCC essentially said was delivery is its own thing. It's not retail.
I see.
And so the answer is, okay, so right now we're considering delivery retail. The CCC took this to the 10-yard line and punted as they do on all of these things. And now it's on us to essentially say, this is how we see delivery. It's either allowed as we do with cultivation manufacturing, or it's not as it is with recreation.
Recreation.
So then if we have to allow delivery, do we get money as we would if it was retail? Like if someone from Millis delivers to Holliston, do we get that money or does Millis?
Yeah, so the way that it works, I think they followed the model of Drizzly, which is alcohol delivery. And so part of the question and part of the way that the CCC handled it that I was uncomfortable with was, if you allow delivery, quote unquote, in your town, that means, that you're essentially open to any delivery coming out of any community into your community. And so anyway, I think the CCC did a great job in addressing some of the concerns, right? How delivery looks, 2 drivers in the car, one person goes to the house. You can't make stops that were not sent from the original point of origin. They did a great job on the security aspect of how delivery looks. They did not do a great job for the town. So I believe what the planning board is looking at right now is to just say, no, look, we consider delivery to be recreational retail. And, when the CCC finishes this project, we will reevaluate is my understanding of where they are with it.
Okay. Jay?
Yeah, I'm just thinking from a finance committee perspective, trying to audit or make sure we're collecting proper amount of taxes, like the way Michelle articulated it, would be a nightmare. It just reminds me of dealing with state auditors. And even if you look at what happened during the pandemic, where like, for instance, Massachusetts is trying to claw back lost tax revenue. It's like a full-time job for them hunting people down. It's just, to me, from a finance committee perspective, how do we get any money out of delivery? And how do we, bottom line, if we're chasing money, how much does it cost to chase the money?
Yeah, the one thing I would draw a comparison to, not from the delivery, the Drizzly side, but on the other side. So right now we've begun, as municipalities have, and this was all state driven, right? And that's what's missing in this component right now, in my opinion, from the finance side, is, Uber and Lyft, right? If the ride is generated in Holliston, Holliston gets the piece that is collected that was determined under statute of what's sort of taxed on that. So any ride sharing service that picks up in Holliston is generated and the revenue goes to Holliston. So we're getting about $6,000 a year now that 5 years ago we weren't getting before sort of this went through the State House process. That has not happened on the delivery side as far as I'm concerned. It's not, all those questions are not answered. And I think that's part of where they are as a planning board.
Okay. Dan?
Yeah, my only thing would be, for my suggestion from a financial perspective, is if we want to start allowing delivery, that we strongly consider or reconsider recreational, so that essentially we maybe retain some of those sales inside Holliston rather than lose.
Well, that depends on the tax structure, right? But it sounds like.
Yeah.
Well, it depends, right? If they sit there and say the tax goes to the residents of the person that's getting it, like they do with the Uber, right? Then Holliston, they'd have to remit taxes to Holliston based on deliveries.
Except that in Uber, it's where the ride begins, right? In theory, with delivery, the delivery begins from the store that it's being delivered from.
Yeah, I know, but it's obviously not the same thing. That's what I'm saying, is that they could easily say it's based on the recipient's address, right? Where if you're delivering to Holliston, then you're paying Holliston taxes. If you're delivering to Mills, you're paying Mills taxes. Mills gets the tax or whatever. So, but again, this is all speculation. So I don't think we need to spend much time until we see what they come up with. Go ahead, Jay.
Just would we state our financial opinion on the warrant on this item, Ken, when this comes across? Just
we are required by bylaw to issue recommendations on any warrant article that has any municipal financial question. So
I would consider this having a municipal, yeah.
Right. So we'd have to see what the financial implications were. Like something like, and what there has been debate over, well, everything has a financial implication, so we should just weigh in on everything, like the things that even like the road acceptances, right? Because there's a financial component to that as well. So we've had debate about that. Sometimes we weigh in, sometimes we don't, but when there's clearly no reason for an opinion, but we're technically required to weigh in on anything that has financial component. So
yeah, and I can get you that one too, actually. So that just reminds me, so I skipped over it. The road acceptance, it's a Fafford project. There was a good amount of residents on the call the other night. They do have a homeowners association, so they kind of funnel through one, which is helpful for debate type purposes. The only thing on that road acceptance for you guys to consider, and I will send that to you as well, is there is significant roadway. It's just the reality of it. It's a large spread out subdivision. The question came up of would the schools adjust accordingly on their bus route? The answer is yes, they would if this was accepted. That's really what the residents are looking for. But also, snow and ice is a concern. It was discussed with DPW. They would adjust their routes and be doing snow and ice on that. So that's a road acceptance. Some of them are relatively low key. That's one that's pretty sizable. So yeah. I can send you all the backup that goes with it, which includes the site plans and those types of things.
I was going to say that has a long history to it too. So
it does.
But it's not the whole development all at once, right?
It's Highlands. It's not Constitution Village. It's Highlands at Holliston, not Constitution Village.
And those would be A, B, or C roads.
That's a question for they're not A roads. They're not A's.
I know. I don't want to assume. I would guess that too.
They're not A's, and I'm trying to think of a couple of the points that they meet. So I can get that information to you as well.
I'm just trying to relate that to dollars, right? An A road.
Yeah, we'll get that'll be part of hopefully what he comes prepared with next week is what the additional costs.
All right.
All right, these last three I sent to you as well. So this is the one that we had discussed. I mean, it has implications on the financial policies that you all voted, and we had a discussion on how this looks. And the conversation I think we all kind of came around is, yeah, we can put these in the financial policies when they get finalized with the Finance Committee and the Select Board in this cycle. But at the end of the day, the financial policies would probably be more narrow than what it will be established. The guardrails of the stabilization fund is established by town meeting. So you can see the language that was put forward. Some of that was, I gave Kate essentially the feedback from Finance Committee conversations, school Select Board conversations. And then some of the things that she's seen other towns do, it does say things like infrastructure for any of the services that we provide that support our response to those types of businesses. But then it also identifies some of the things we talked about, the services provided through Youth and Family Services, schools, police would be essentially the guardrails of what could be used out of the stabilization fund. The dedication of certain receipts and the dedication of cannabis receipts is just the way that works in terms of the legalese that goes through the town meeting. The one thing I would highlight, I pointed out, because we have 4 cannabis articles here, I was, trying to streamline as much as possible. Because we do not allow recreational retail, we do not have the excise tax associated with cannabis. The revenue that we generate is through fees associated with our host community agreements. It is not excise tax. If at some point in the future, the town chose to reverse course, as Mr. Alfred had previously stated, on recreational retail, at that time, we would want to then adopt, assuming we would want that revenue as well to go in the stabilization fund, an article that says that the excise revenue also goes in. I don't have that on here because one of the things I don't want to give people the indication of is that there's some recommendation to reverse course on recreational retail. Certainly, if somebody brings that forward, a future town meeting can consider it, but that's not part of what this conversation is. This conversation is we're getting cannabis revenue through our HCAs. We're creating a stabilization fund for these guardrails. We're putting that money in there. The financial policies will address it, and we'll be looking at that. And that will stop us from having to deal with ever potentially building this into, our local receipts that may fluctuate based on these agreements or the businesses coming in and out. It'll go into the fund. We can look at the balance, determine a plan to spend that on the allowable expenses.
Sure. Okay, good, Jay.
Are we deliberating the verbiage tonight, or is that next week?
No, that's next week.
Got it.
As I said, what will happen is Travis as you see, he's sending us stuff already. We'll get the rest of the stuff for all these, and then we'll either, depending on whether we have enough information, we'll either vote it all next week, or the worst case, we'll vote it the week after, because we have to make our decisions by October 4th.
So what he sent for Article 17 is not fully baked. It's just a pre-read.
Oh, it might be. It is technically preliminary in that he said that they're still working on some stuff, but it's probably close enough to the final product that you can get some. All I'm saying is wait till the final product.
Wait till next week. I got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think this version was Kate Federoff delivering on the feedback I gave her from FinCom and Select Board. So if there's something that you want considered now, I certainly, it's not a problem to give it to me now. But this is essentially her. 18 and 19 address sort of the mechanisms here, and 17 is really the initial guardrails of what the stabilization fund could be. We can always narrow it down through financial policies as well.
Yeah, I'll wait for my teammates to chime in next week, I guess. I'll hold my feedback.
Okay, Ben?
How come we're not putting any money into the retirement fund, the pension fund?
That's up at the top. Yeah.
It's a creation of it, right? Or
No, we already created it, remember?
Okay, that's right. So how much are we putting in?
So at this point, and with the way the financial policy recommendation from staff was 250 from tax, from the finance committee recommendations 250 from free cash, and so we don't have finalized, but 250 was essentially the number that's been bandied about. And I sent to you all in the email today the update. Last year was really the earliest we've got free cash certified in the last decade plus. I would anticipate if we get it this week, we can finalize some of those conversations again next Tuesday as well.
Okay.
We've submitted it, Travis?
Yes.
Okay. Anything else, Travis?
Citizens petition, I think I mentioned on the top, we'll have Jay on Monday night if there's any questions on that. And yeah, that's 19 or 20 articles depending on the citizens petition. And I think next week we'll wrap up, be able to have a final draft after that.
Okay. So Vin, you want to give an update on the workings of the capital subcommittee?
Sure. Travis, you want to put the thing back up and we'll just say we've gone through?
Sure.
let's-
You want the one with the numbers?
Yeah,
All right, let me pull up the one. 1 second.
sorry to surprise you.
No, it's all right.
I wasn't expecting to go on. It wasn't part of the agenda, so I don't.
Yes, it was. It's right on the agenda. What does
It's
it
quite
say?
clearly part of the agenda.
Oh,
I
damn.
was gonna say, look at the agenda number 3, status report.
He's not
from the
sharing
capital
this one
subcommittee.
though.
Okay.
Well, that's why we got through the message in more than 10 minutes.
Oh, my God. So without further ado, yes, okay, be quiet. So we've gone through the committee and talked to everybody. Pretty much we bandied about and we labored over all these different things. We had one final item, which was the town hall HR office / the office that used to be the sewer committee or whatever they were upstairs on the third floor.
Pinecrest room,
What was it?
the Pinecrest room.
Was it Pinecrest room? No, it was something else, right? But it's basically in front of the building on the third floor. So you probably would never have to go see it, but it's what we're going to do is put the conference rooms that are downstairs, or one conference room that is downstairs, is going to be changed into offices, and they're going to move the conference room upstairs. And it's actually better because it's ADA compliant because the elevator's right there. So the number we had was very conservative, and we said, well, we don't want to go back to the town. Can you give us a final number? And this final number, I guess, is the 15,500. So the other items we reviewed, and we will be bringing it forward to the whole committee next week. One thing we talked about a lot was the rooftop unit set aside is the $500,000 there. So it's not really right now money to be used to purchase a rooftop unit at the auditorium, because the schools are hoping that the schools will get replaced, specifically the high school. They're holding out hope that the state will come through and the SOI will be approved. But the rooftop unit is past its useful life, but they're being very frugal, and we thank them. So they don't want to go out and buy a new one, because if they replace it and we get approved, it's no reason to. So, but they're afraid that it goes down in the middle of the year, have to worry about budget approval. So we're basically going to set aside money for them to use in case they need to replace one of the many rooftop units, but primarily the one in the auditorium. We'll bring it forward, but if anybody has any questions about the stuff right now, maybe we can discuss. If not, we'll talk about it next week.
Yeah, I was just going to point out that this list has not been voted on by the subcommittee, and the plan is that we're going to vote on it later this week and then bring it to the full committee next Tuesday.
Yep.
So go ahead, Jay.
Just an FYI, I take the notes real time, probably closer to a stenographer, but when the school committee was in and John Cronin was asking Keith Bidet questions, I believe John was hoping that, is it James Keith, the facilities manager? Did I get the name right?
Yep.
He was looking for some input from James Keith on how to best use that money, because at least from what I heard, John's comment was like, it's a big chunk of money. And some of the questions that I heard from John Cronin seemed logical. Like, I'm not an engineer, but it's a big chunk of money, and I'm hoping we get a little bit more of insight, like what John was asking before we deliberate that next week. Like, there was debates about whether, like, comment about, well, if we put that unit in and then replace the roof, do we have to take the unit down? And he's actually dealing with a very specific issue, very similar to that in his day job. So I think that's why he asked that very pointed question. So before, like, other than just to like emergency repair because a unit dies out, I'd be really curious how that $500K is being spent to make sure from a facilities perspective, a reasonable person would say we spent that money wisely.
We had those same conversations. The other option we bandied about was actually increasing our reserve amount to cover such a need. And so they would have to come before the committee and we could approve it the general feeling, and we'll leave it up to the other committee members, but was we understand and we trust you. So, but I understand completely what John's saying, and those are valid concerns. No,
The other thing, Ben, is we talked about is having it sunset so that it had to be reauthorized at some certain interval, and that before they spent the money, they had to we had to talk it through just to make sure that an SOI wasn't just approved and they're going to go dump this money into it and it's going to basically be not usable for the new. We're cognizant of those issues. Yeah.
So that's the debate we're having. So
That's next week.
Our meeting is tentative. I think it's Thursday at 5 is we're having.
Yes. So assuming that we approve the whole entire amount, we'll be bringing it back to this committee.
Next Tuesday, the whole finance committee.
Yes.
Yes. So.
I put in the packet or in the email, if you scroll through that attachment, you'll see all the backup, some of the request forms that have multiple years worth of impact on budgets. It'll lay out some of that. If we have quotes, which, Chris Mayo's request has a quote attached to it, as a couple do. And then the backup related to the school request is really based on the conversation. This has been on their 5-year capital list since the Collins Center review is where that number was generated. And the way that I looked at it in that conversation, and Lisa Koshin, who was presenting it, was really looking at the balance of the CapEx fund of $7 million and identifying the fact that, these are the needs that are going to be coming up in the next X number of years, and really putting an encumbrance against that balance for that purpose is why I would personally be comfortable with it. But obviously it's a little bit off. It's unlike the rest on the list, certainly.
Michelle?
What's the time frame for a new high school? I mean, let's say the SOI is approved. When will kids move into high school?
Yeah. Well, first off, let's remember there's other places in the state who have worse buildings than ours, and there are also some buildings are bursting at the seams. So we don't fit those criteria. So my guess, this is me, we're probably very low on the list. Now we can keep filing, and we will, but priority-wise,
Right. But I'm saying best case, let's say the SOI that's submitted.
If you get in the program now, you're probably looking at least 3 years before you've got it done.
It's actually why we need the high school to fall apart quicker.
You have multiple ballot questions, right?
Yeah.
You're doing a ballot question before the feasibility. You're doing a ballot question before the borrowing on the full project. There's a lot of design engineering. You're setting up an entire sort of building committee that goes through with the MSBA process. The way that I sort of look at it, and when I look at the 5-year planning of this, when you go through the MSBA, generally speaking, you're looking at 5 to 8 years worth of SOIs, right? We're now through 4 years. So theoretically, we're in that stage where any year we got to be ready to go. But, is it to Vin's point, are we probably more on the 8 side potentially? But then after that, I think, the chair's point of 3 years as the process once you do get selected is probably accurate.
Yeah, and the other thing, and I just want to say this for anybody who may watch this later, just getting in the program doesn't guarantee a new building, right? They have to do the feasibility study, and then they recommend that's one of the 4 options they can recommend. So it's not like the minute we get into we meaning the town gets accepted into the program, that suddenly we're building a new high school. They may come back and say, this building just needs a major renovation, and here's how we're going to do it, right? So there are multiple options on the table. It's not as simple as you get in the program and you've got a new high school.
So this unit's going to need to be replaced.
Well, it's lasted. This is part of the discussion we had. It's lasted a long time. It's for the auditorium. One of the concerns we had when we discussed it was, is this something like let's say for classrooms where you're saying, okay, if it fails, then you're going to have classrooms or labs or something like this that don't have proper air handling, so to speak. And the answer was no. This is the auditorium. The biggest one in the district is the auditorium at the high school, because that auditorium is so large relative to most high school auditoriums. So, obviously if the air handler failed, you have limited use of the auditorium, so forth and so on. You could still use it, but you just wouldn't have the air handling capability. and you probably would prefer not to use it. But given that it would take weeks to replace it, that was the feeling of, this money should be available. Now, whether it's made available through the reserve fund, through some other means, that's what we have to discuss. But the air, just to be clear, the air handlers in general do not handle classrooms. I don't want to speak, I'm not the building expert, but the way it was explained to us was the vast majority of the air handling is for hallways and, hallways, auditoriums, cafeteria type thing, not classrooms. But they have their own individual systems, or they're tied into a central system.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Jay.
Yeah. So again, when Keith Paday was there was conversations about, I think they definitely need to put some money in to keep, it's like duct tape and Band-Aids to keep some of the stuff moving. So we definitely, I don't think, want to hamstring it. Like, for instance, my son works out 6 a.m. workouts. You can't use the shower because there's mold in it. So, and Keith was talking about they're trying to remediate mold through parts of the school. So, like some of these systems, like I think we need to give them some money to get it done versus waiting for it to break down. But like we said before, like I like Dan's idea of put time boxing the money or what have you. But the school's not coming anytime soon. A lot of that equipment's reached the end of its useful life. And the impression I got from Keith's presentation was there was not a formal maintenance program like what they were talking about with the police cruisers, where they're on a rotate, the cruiser reaches its useful life, they replace it. I did not get that impression from the schools. So if
for
they're
the
like,
handlers, no. Yeah.
Right. So if they're saying, hey, this is a piece of equipment that we're just trying to keep running, borrowing. He also said that some of the equipment is so old that they're scrapping parts from other equipment, and they don't know how much longer they can do that. So we're in a position where some of this money needs to be spent, but I think as financial advisors to the town, we should just make sure that we're not throwing away too much, spending too much good money after bad.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. And I will say that they do have, we're talking about this one particular system because that's the big one that they're worried about, but they have provided the information to what was then the Collins Center. Now it's in Travis's hands on these air handlers and when they need to be replaced. So that is comprehended already in the capital plan. This is just to prepare for an exceptional failure. So.
But I got the impression that they were going to move on some of that equipment out of concern, like you were saying someone was saying a minute ago, that they could take out a classroom, and they're using the auditorium. At least last spring, they were using the auditorium for academic settings. So
right,
I go ahead.
All I'm saying is that the air handler replacement as a general thing is already in the capital plan. So they're going to get money to do that already as part of the capital plan. Okay. Now it's not this year, but they provided that information. Keith already provided all the information about how many units will need to be replaced, that kind of thing. As I said, this is just more, we want to have something available in case something fails and we need the money right now.
Right. And that's what I'm saying is I think it was fingers crossed we could make it to the capital plan. That was the impression I got from this.
But I will say, just from a procedural standpoint, if the capital plan that they provided to us is no longer sufficient, then it is incumbent upon the school committee, through presumably Keith and Susan, to update their inputs into the capital. If they're sitting there saying, geez, we put in a 10-year replacement and we think we're not going to make it past 5, then they should be debating that, discussing that, and giving that to Travis. Again, think about it from our perspective, which is we consider only requests that come officially from. So it's not our job to go tell them they need to replace the roof things. It's their job to tell us they need to get them on the capital plan.
And I could be,
they need to let us know.
I could be misquoting. I don't feel like I am, Ken, but I'm just explaining the impression I got from the ad hoc presentation that Keith delivered.
I think you got the right impression. I'm just saying that if that's really the way, if that's really the thing that they think that, okay, these things are not going to make it through what's in the capital plan, they should be bringing that to us or to Travis, sooner rather than later, so that Travis can say, okay, I got to rework some of these items. So, okay, anything else, Vin? Okay, so all this stuff will be, as I said, we're going to have a subcommittee meeting later this week, and we'll have the full discussion on the list next week with And between now and then, you'll get all the supporting information. As Travis said, there's a bunch of supporting documents that go with all these things. So, okay. Anybody have any other liaison updates they want to make? That's the last item on our agenda.
Just one request, like I'm not going to get into it, but the sheet that Travis sent where project request and financing plan, department facilities, the HVAC systems for next week, for some of these items, it would be helpful to get a little bit of guidance on that, because I see the schedule and it says like the 5-year total is 61K, but one of the bullets in the description / justification it says like 166 grand. So do you want us to send questions in advance of our meeting next week?
Yeah, if you have questions, you can certainly in advance of our meeting, you can send it, obviously to the extent that you need something answered by Travis in our open meeting, send it to him in advance so that he's prepared to answer it in open session.
Okay, fair enough. That's how I'll do it. Thank you.
So, okay, anybody want to say? Okay, so just procedurally, I just want to quickly go over calendar. So we have next week, which is the 28th, and then we have the week after, which I think is the 4th. Is that the 4th? No, it's the 5th of October. So because of the change to town meeting, we have to go to press on the 8th. So that means we have to take all our votes over the next 2 weeks, which means that I will have a warrant message for the 5th for us to, send out ahead of the 5th for us to consider. But the plan will be that over the next 2 weeks, we vote what we need to vote when we get all the information. We will approve the warrant message on the 5th, and then I will work with Travis to make sure we get our report out by the 8th. So just as I said, just procedurally, that's how it's going to look for the next couple of weeks. So,
do we vote on that report, the finance report?
Yes.
So when will we do that?
When we do the warrant message, we will have a draft of the report. When I say that I finally, what happens is we discuss the report on the 5th, and then once we vote the final edits, I make the edits and then work with Travis to get it prettied up and sent out. So
thank you. Clear.
Okay. So we are now reached the end of our agenda. So I guess nobody has anything else. I'll entertain the motion. Got to be unmuted to say that, Dan.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, that is not subject to debate. So proceed immediately to a vote. Mr. Alfred?
Yes.
Ms. Zemer?
Yes.
Mr. Whitaker?
Yes.
Mr. Murphy?
Yes.
Mr. Robinson?
Yes.
And I vote yes. That concludes the Tuesday, September 21st meeting of the Finance Committee. Thank you for joining us tonight. As you just heard, we'll be meeting again next Tuesday, the 28th, to continue our preparation for the fall town meeting. But for tonight, we're done. So thank you and good night.